So, and anyone that knows me, which is not a lot of people on this call, but I'm a nerd that loves acronyms. So the acronym here, PLANT, because it is a tree, stands for the 5 core competencies. But I want to touch first on the trunk. And that trunk of the tree, which is what really props up all of the other branches, is human intelligence. And we talk about smart and intelligence out of the same side of our mouth, when in fact they're very different things. And I've long talked about the fact that the future is not going to be around smart, and we need to stop talking about smart, and we need to stop training around smart, because smart is based on rote memorization. It is based on linear thinking, and it's what I talked about before. Smart is going onto software, and it is being automated. So we cannot train or educate around that anymore. We have to think in terms of intelligence. And intelligence requires critical thinking, and true critical thinking, and figuring out the solution to a problem when you've never been faced with that problem before. So that is what is propping up this tree. And so let's kind of go through each branch here, and then we can open this up to conversation. So that first branch is purpose and passion. And these two things are never really talked about as core competencies, but this encapsulates everything from promoting a sense of inspiration and motivation, not just for yourself, but your people internally, creativity, design thinking. And I've long said that the future is going to be not just about design, but the creation of design-based thinking is a core managerial competency, because it would always be like the chief design officer in the corner, you know, making his or her like cool designs and informing the rest of the organization about it. But now it has to be embedded within all facets of any company, particularly as we spend more of our time being creative and thinking creatively. And there's also a very intimate relationship here between work, self-reliance, purpose, dignity, and meaning. Now there's an offshoot of people called the post-workists, and they're thinking about kind of this utopian time when we're able to decouple ourselves from capitalism and just go to kind of like this renewed sense of, it's like a human renaissance of thought. Now, do I think we're necessarily going to get there anytime soon? No, but it's an interesting way to think about the fact that if we are able to basically rise above a lot of the drudgery and a lot of the tasks that we can just defer to artificial intelligence, what does that do to transform our own thinking and our way in which we can actually tap into human purpose and passion in new ways? Literacy is another core offshoot of this. This is everything from media literacy, the ability to discern what is real and what is fake, what is true and what is false. I read last year, it was a study that came out of Stanford, that I think it was something like 86% of 8th graders were not able to tell the difference between real and sponsored content online. So there is a real vacuum of media literacy out there. So being able to teach people what is even real or what was created by a bot on Twitter, and that is interrelated to everything that's happening with analytical and critical thinking. Data literacy is a core part of this, STEM going into STEAM, where the A we know is arts. Social literacy, so social and cross-cultural literacy. Emotional literacy, so combining the emotional quotient, the EQ, with empathy. And then there's another one that I want to touch on, which is not on this tree, but is in the one that I can send Mark to send around to all of you, because I've made some updates to it, which is visual literacy. With Templosion, we know that much more of our communication is getting truncated and happening visually, whether it's through even something as silly as Snapchat, all the way to memes and GIFs. There's actually a new job emerging from all of this, which is a regional emoji detector. And it sounds so ridiculous, but this is someone who is brought into court cases that can help people discern the ambiguities in the text messages involving emojis. And there's that's a core competency in a lot of ways and a growth area in the future. And again, I try to remove my own value judgments because I'm like, that sounds ridiculous. But visual literacy is going to be a core part of this. Analytical and critical thinking. This really is all about a multidisciplinary foundation to knowledge and thought, ultimately so that independent ideas can be put within kind of a more proper framework. It's all about understanding, learning, and knowing more about things, giving people meaning to their collective experiences, problem solving, and wisdom and judgment are also core offshoots of this branch. The N is nimbleness. And I kind of railed against adaptability in the beginning, but being adaptable internal to an organization, being adaptable at work has taken on greater urgency, and lifelong learning. And I would say the future is even less about lifelong learning, as it is more about lifelong forgetting. We need to get comfortable forgetting all of the information and the knowledge that we have acquired that does not serve us for the future. So it's not just about gaining access to new ways of learning, but it's also new ways of forgetting. And then the last piece of this is trust. The things that you see here in those two boxes, it's trust between humans and humans, but it's also humans and what I call non-carbon life forms. So these are all of the systems, the electronic entities, the AI systems, the algorithms, a lot of these things that are controlling much more of our lives, monitoring what it is that we do at work. So there's greater need for honesty, which is a big part of this, but also authenticity, transparency, and judgment. Now, one of the things that is not on this tree, and Mark heard me present on this yesterday, and it was yesterday because I just created this yesterday, is I was thinking about this tree and what I created prior to the pandemic and how to expand on this tree kind of in this post-pandemic world. And I thought that this is not necessarily a wholly complete picture because we're only looking at how it grows up from human intelligence, not below. So an addendum to this is what I'm calling roots, and that is a root structure. And it's an acronym too, because I love acronyms, with the ROOTS being the 5 aspects that feed into human intelligence that increasingly we need to look at, especially in a world that's going to be more about virtual and flexible work. So the R is resiliency. This is kind of the rubber ball effect. It's what everybody is talking about now with our own ability to bounce back. But it's also cultivating a belief in yourself, in your own ability to cope and cope with kind of major existential threats like what we are dealing with now. The first O is outlook. It's how you choose to view the world. It's not just about have and have nots, but it's about can and cannots. And it's about a belief that the future can be seen differently. The next O is objectivity. And I've long said that the hardest part of my job and what it is that we do is removing the blinders, the value judgments, the heuristics, the personal biases, keeping those to a minimum and really seeing through those new eyes and keeping a realistic perspective. The T is tenacity. A lot of people now too are talking about how to instill a sense of grit, a sense of perseverance, and that goes hand in hand with resiliency. It's all about inner strength and a mental toughness. And then the S is self-regulation, and this is ability to self-manage disruptive emotions, impulses, despite the unpredictability of the world. And we know that the one certainty of the world now and increasingly in the future is that we can be guaranteed unpredictability. So how we choose to regulate it and how we choose to manage it is within our control. So ultimately, to put a bow on all of this, this tree is meant solely just as kind of a modeling outline. This is an example of how my mind works, but it is by no means fixed. It's also just a way to help visualize potential arenas for future jobs, even the ones that we have yet to imagine, like that ridiculous one that's being created around court cases and emojis. Because ultimately, when it comes down to future proofing, it's less about picking a safe job, and it's more about constantly updating the skills in this tree throughout your entire career. And education, going back to education for a second, it needs to change dramatically if workers are going to adapt to this new environment. If this is what we're training for, how do we educate around it differently? Because ultimately, when it comes down to whether it's talent management, talent acquisition, human capital, workforce strategy throughout all levels of the organization, we have to ultimately rethink how we hire for, train for, and prepare for all of the aspects that I talked about in the competency tree. So with that, I will end there. I think we have some time for Q&A. I haven't looked at any of the comments in the chat, but Mark, if you want to maybe manage a couple questions, I'd be happy to answer some. And then I will also send you the updated competency tree, Mark, if you would like to add that to the app, because you heard the update in real time yesterday.
Perfect. So thoughts, questions?
Okay,
Sarah.
I have to speak. This is amazing. I love your work. I am so grateful for you presenting this. And it's, you've given so much thought. I teach at Southern New Hampshire University, organizational analysis and social entrepreneurial leadership to doctoral students in the Ed Leadership Program. And this is going to be a real good tool for me to share with them if I have your permission. Or I'd love to have you speak to them. The other thing I just want to share, and then I'll stop talking, is I love the roots. My research and dissertation is all around resilience and beliefs in oneself, beliefs in others. And the only comment that I would make is I would look at the difference. We talk a lot about the difference between the word resilience and resiliency. And resilience is a process, not a trait. And so the research around resilience is encouraging people to use the word resilience instead of resiliency, because resiliency often connotes people think of it as a trait instead of a process.
That's a great point, Sarah. I like that point. Yeah.
And I'm totally digging this, and you and I are going to talk later.
We know you're digging it because you got up at 5:30 in the morning.
I know it.
Right.
I know it. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Erica.
What are other people thinking broadly about this? Francis, you're at you're 9 o'clock in the evening. So what are you thinking about this?
The first thought that comes to mind is the difference of why the U.S. is so well positioned for the future. Because when I look at many of the markets that I do most of my work in Asia, I see that so many of these traits are missing both in the education system and the way that society functions. And so this gives me actually a renewed sense of hope or excitement about the future of the U.S. versus global competitors.
Yeah, and Francis, that's a really good point. And I've been looking a lot at the Chinese model for education, and the fact that so much has been just about that one offshoot off of data literacy, because obviously they teach to the national test, and it's based largely on this linear thinking that I'm talking about. And these students are going through burnout, but yet they're actually grappling with some of the same questions that we are as they look to how to cultivate these softer skills. And they're actually wondering if empathy is something that can be taught or if we are born with it. And that's kind of a big existential question because we don't know. It's the old kind of nature v nurture debate. So they're looking at ways to even leverage a lot of those technologies I talk about, which everything honestly comes out of Asia first, whether it's VR, AR, robotic teachers, or holographic tech. It's all being prototyped there first. But they're looking at an interesting, I think, hybridized model, not in the way that we are, but in a way where they're actually using technology to cultivate some of these softer things that I talk about in the tree.
But if I look around the tree, Erica, I actually can't see one area where China is doing a good job.
No, and that's why I say in the roots, like the objectivity part, it's really hard to kind of keep my own value judgments out of the equation. So yes, good, bad, it's all relative, but Mark knows one of the themes that we talked about in yesterday's meeting was kind of this digital Berlin Wall and the rise of techno-nationalism between US and China, and that's a conversation for another day. and what's happening there. But one of the biggest existential threats in that is the fact that a lot of talent, either coming out of the US, but also mostly coming out of China, is going to be stuck basically within physical boundaries of these countries because we're holding on to our talents so tightly. So it'll be interesting to see too, kind of how this kind of quote unquote Cold War affects talent composition, talent acquisition, and education.
Yeah, much like a tree, I'm not sure that the roots will hold in the soil here.
Well, that's a topic for that Asia deep dive, or it could be a subset topic. Other thoughts? How about I keep on calling you, Eddie, for the European perspective, maybe towards education, maybe or any other thing that you're seeing here that might resonate or you may question.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you, Erica. This is incredible. It's really good stuff. I've been writing notes left and right. What always struck me for a large part of American education, particularly K through 12, is that it was relatively little focused on critical thinking and a lot of repetition versus our education in Western Europe. And I think that's coming back to your tree and analytical and critical thinking, which without it we're lost because we don't know what in the world is right and wrong, visually, mentally, etc. Interestingly enough, little anecdote: we put our youngest daughter in a Chinese school this year. The public school she went to was inadequate in changing from an offline to an online environment. And she was done in an hour and a half and wasn't interested in learning anymore, which is obviously the most terrible thing when you're a kid. And our minds are blown by the way they completely rethought the curriculum, much like all your tree trunks. Developing all actually the skills that you of the PLANT that you wrote there. They touched on all of them in a different way. And she's now learning Mandarin, but also how to apply Mandarin in math, for example. And really, they're really stretching her mind from 8 to 3. It's kind of incredible to notice the difference in learning, and it's very eclectic international school called Basis, and so this is spot on for me, and it confirms my earlier thought that we do well with learning from other cultures, particularly Asian cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why that social literacy piece, it's not just about by having a global perspective, but it really is about cross-cultural and about taking kind of the best practices and applying them, and not just paying it lip service, but actually implementing them in a way that matters.
That's right. And not being stuck in one paradigm. Which obviously in the public school system in the US, that's very hard to change. We all know that. Mm-hmm. But private schools can I think meander a little faster, particularly when the route is international.
Other questions, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, Erica, this is John Pagley. Thank you for your presentation. Absolutely brilliant, fascinating, intriguing. I put in chat, and I don't know if that was picked up. How would your thoughts be implemented? What is the critical path to implementation? And I guess that kind of echoes the preceding question in a way.
Well, yeah, so you wrote there.
Erica, or is it me?
Sounds like you might have cut out, Erica.
Sorry, I have
You're still robotic, but we at least can hear you.
a little note my connection. Okay, sorry about that.
There you go.
You would think that in a New York City apartment building, I wouldn't have problems with Wi-Fi, but so John, just to quickly answer your question, because this is such a huge thing, or what are the paths to get there? We have a series of what we call our thinking technologies, and we created these thinking technologies a long time ago because one of the biggest impediments to learning, and I'm not going to tackle the future of education and my solutions to it today, but one of the biggest impediments to learning, I think, goes back to this objectivity piece, because we get in our own way. And we take a lot of our clients through an exercise that sounds really silly, but actually helps open up those pathways, which is called the recognition of educated incapacity, but how to see through alien eyes. And educated incapacity is basically knowing so much about what it is that you know, that you're the last to be able to see the future for it differently. And I say that because, you know, if I wanted to find out about the future of healthcare, the last person I would ask would be a doctor, and so on and so forth. And we'll take people through this exercise saying, if an alien came down from another planet and saw what the world looked like, what would you actually see? And it just gets people comfortable flipping their perspectives. It's kind of the Rubens vase example of the optical illusion, where, you know, if you see it one way, it's a vase, and it's also the profile of two faces. If you're stuck only seeing the vase, you're seeing a market for all of the things that you would sell a vase into. If you see the profile of two faces, you're seeing a totally different market and a completely different path to thinking, just completely differently. But yet we're trapped within the way in which we view things. It's human nature to see one or the other, not both. So how do we think in terms of both? And how do you kind of move the foreground back and the background forward and capitalize on things that are not in plain, or that are in plain sight? We just haven't been trained to see them. So it's just a way, it's kind of a mental exercise that I think we can always do. It's how I try to even identify trends, is through this kind of figure ground optical illusion, to say, what are the things that I'm just not seeing because I'm not training myself to see it? And again, it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's the lowest hanging fruit, but it can drop money to the bottom line and be a huge differentiator and get us to think critically and analytically about our businesses without going through all of this rigmarole. It's really just changing our mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So a few other questions. I'm going to violate my 10-minute break rule. Maybe we'll take a 10-minute break at 9. We'll keep the Q&A going.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I love the presentation and the visuals, the symbolism. There's so many implications in nature that we can learn from. And I threw in the chat an example of a book called Wise Trees, which essentially tells many, many stories. It's a photographic history and learning, but it essentially talks about interconnectedness and the interdependence within nature, and how there's really symbiotic relationships that are beneficial. I learned a lot through a conservation environmentalist this past spring when we were working on an educational project, and he is a former leadership development boss and now retired and is a land steward. But it's a fascinating visual that you've selected to talk about the interconnectedness and how there are many, many considerations for education. So thank you for this.
You know, I had a visual as you were talking, Leslie, because we both went to Denison, which is, you know, small, like under 10 students per professor. It's the professorial mentors. And I'd like to get the professors into our ecosystem. We started to do that with Denison. I think that, you know, you were teaching, Sarah. I think there are others here, and some who just really don't think our university system is A, gives return on investment, or B, is preparing people properly. So
totally, and I would really help you and support you with that. Totally.
Who else? Tom, you put yourself off mute. Did you want to ask? You want to say something? or anyone else?
I think it's absolutely brilliant. I love kind of the way you framed out this thing. I mean, I think I'm a brand guy, and I look at this as a model for how you'd want to build any great company, any great organization, any great brand, in terms of how do you find that, quantum next stage of growth in an organization. And because it's kind of giving you kind of a pathway. And some of the great brands are already behaving in some of these ways. But I think this is just a really good holistic way of, and here's what it's going to take to kind of reboot and rebuild your organization, your brand, your company, whatever's important to you, right? Whether you're investing in it or leading it. The challenge does become, and I think, Erica, I'm sure you face this as have I, is how do you kind of get there, right? And I've kind of come to the realization with most companies, it's almost like, you have to build a new plane while you're flying the plane, right? Or you have to think about two companies. Who's run the company today, right? Where you have to deliver to shareholders over the next 12 to 18 months. And how do you find a way to build the company of tomorrow around kind of a framework like this that I think will allow you to thrive into a future that is just going to rapidly change. So I think it's a really, really great framework. And you need really great leadership to help an organization kind of get you through the pathway and begin to operationalize some of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're kind of touching on the one piece that I intentionally did not put in this tree because of the very point that you're making, which is the culture piece. Because that's the lens through which a lot of this is viewed. And that's why I've always said to any of our companies and any brands that I've worked with in particular, because they know the internal culture. So within this framework, pick the pieces that you think will
That's too bad.
really resonate, because this is not just a one size with it. It's pick the things that really matter and then create your own offshoots. So for brands, the trust piece in particular is a huge one for them. So how to really cultivate that differently. And there's no piece of this that I don't think will touch anybody, but there are what you can't focus on 5 and then the 5 roots simultaneously. But that drill piece is a big part of this as well. And I just want to say too, this and then a bunch of other content too. And this is by no means a sales pitch because we're a small family business.
Well, I was about to make one for you.
What's that?
I was about to make one.
We have kind of our
Sorry, go ahead.
Trends report for 2020. So if any of you guys want that, it's on our website. So you can just go sign up. You'll receive this. And it's a compendium of this and probably like a dozen of other trends in easily kind of digestible format. But it's a nice way to also kind of contextualize this within some of the other macro forces that I talked about. If anyone just wants some more mind candy.
This is a mind candy crowd. What I was going to say is that Erica and I have been thinking of I think our worlds separate makes sense, but there's some ways where we want to have whether it's a monthly or quarterly, where our worlds get together. For those who are, not only just dollars and cents, but lateral, interesting thinkers, or maybe C-suite people, because in her world is really like chief innovation officers, chief marketing officers, head of strategy for, Fortune 500,000 companies and some entrepreneurs. I'd made one chat comment and had like eight people that I've interacted with. Some Michigan, some just I could connect my venture world to those entrepreneurs. It's been a great. Thanks to Tom for introducing us. Any last question before? Because I do want to. One thing I learned from her is that she offered a break. I think we all need like a little break before we jump into these.
Can I ask one more question? Because I find it so fascinating. Have you done work with sort of head of HRs of large organization to sort of operationalize some of the main tenets you're looking for future leaders, and how to screen for it?
Oh man, so Eddie, that is a conversation that we need to have offline because Mark will kill me with all of the things that I have to say about that because I'll eat into the entire break. We have worked with dozens upon dozens of CHROs over the years, and I'm going to speak very candidly. We want to bang our head up against a wall because that is probably one of the last functional areas within any organization that is willing, that they are even calling themselves human resources, is indicative of the fact that they are stuck in an old model because we're hiring half humans and half systems. They are valuing the wrong things and talk about, again, something functional that is still operating within a largely industrialized era way.